Is deploying a giant space shade the real solution to global warming? As climate change accelerates, society is pouring trillions of dollars into reducing carbon emissions, transitioning to renewable energy, and adapting to a hotter planet. But what if there's a cheaper, more effective solution that bypasses all of these costly efforts? Enter the space sunshade, an audacious idea that could cool the Earth immediately by blocking sunlight, all while avoiding the staggering costs and political gridlock of fighting global warming the traditional way. Instead of throwing $50, 60 trillion into what some argue is a futile, slow-moving attempt to overhaul the global economy, we could deploy a space sunshade for a fraction of the cost and fix the problem more efficiently. But are we too blinded by our commitment to the right path to see it? The space sunshade, a radical but realistic solution. The space sunshade concept, part of solar radiation management, SRM, involves deploying a massive structure in space to block 2% of the sun's rays. This might sound far-fetched, but it's becoming increasingly plausible as space technology advances. With an estimated $12, 18 trillion upfront cost and $100, 500 billion in maintenance every decade, a space sunshade could immediately reduce global temperatures, potentially preventing the worst effects of climate change without requiring the world to completely overhaul its energy systems. But here's the controversial question: why aren't we seriously pursuing this option? The idea of deploying a space sunshade has been met with skepticism, largely because it disrupts the accepted narrative of how we should solve climate change, by reducing emissions at all costs, even if it bankrupts nations and disrupts economies. The massive investments required to cut emissions and switch to renewable energy are projected to hit $50, 60 trillion over the next 30 years. Meanwhile, a space sunshade offers a faster, cheaper alternative. Yet governments and environmental groups remain fixated on expensive solutions that may not work quickly enough. The true costs of fighting climate change: is it worth it? The traditional approach to combating climate change is costly, unbelievably so. Shifting the global energy system from fossil fuels to renewables is expected to cost $36 trillion by 2050. This enormous expenditure involves massive infrastructure projects and disruptive changes to industries that provide millions of jobs. On top of that, energy efficiency improvements and electrification initiatives will require another $5, 10 trillion over the next few decades. These upgrades might help reduce emissions, but they will hit economies hard, especially in developing nations. And that's just the start. Even after these huge investments, we're still left with the problem of carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere. Technologies to capture and store CO2, while promising, are incredibly expensive. Scaling them up would add an additional $3, 5 trillion to the price tag. On top of that, the United Nations estimates that global adaptation efforts to handle the inevitable effects of climate change, like rising sea levels and extreme weather, will cost $4, 10 trillion by 2050. This brings the total price of fighting climate change through traditional methods to an astronomical $50, 60 trillion over the next 3 decades. Meanwhile, the problem is getting worse by the day. For all the trillions we are investing, temperatures continue to rise, and extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. Is this really the best use of our resources, or are we throwing good money after bad? Why the space sunshade might be the smarter option. The space sunshade presents a drastically different approach. Instead of pouring trillions into slow, incremental progress on emissions reductions, we could deploy a sunshade that would cool the planet immediately. With a price tag of $12, 18 trillion, the sunshade is far cheaper than the decades-long transition to renewable energy, which not only takes time but also causes massive economic disruptions, especially for countries reliant on fossil fuel industries. Moreover, a space sunshade sidesteps the political and economic headaches of transitioning to a green economy. The shift to renewables involves job losses, economic reconfigurations, and massive disruptions to the global economy. Countries dependent on oil, gas, and coal production could face severe economic decline, while green energy initiatives require substantial subsidies that many developing countries simply can't afford. The space sunshade offers a solution that doesn't involve upending entire economies or sparking political resistance. Instead, it delivers a controlled, targeted approach to cooling the Earth without forcing everyone to make sacrifices. Immediate cooling versus waiting decades. There's also the issue of time. Transitioning to renewable energy is a process that takes decades. Even with trillions of dollars invested, the reduction of greenhouse gases won't stop global temperatures from rising in the short term. The damage already done means that the Earth will continue to heat up even if we achieve net zero emissions. A space sunshade, on the other hand, could cool the planet almost instantly, potentially preventing the catastrophic tipping points like ice sheet collapse and massive biodiversity loss that could devastate ecosystems and human societies alike. Why wait decades for uncertain results when we can solve the problem in a matter of years? Is tradition blocking progress? Why aren't we more seriously considering this radical idea? One reason is the environmental orthodoxy that has taken hold over the past few decades. The idea that climate change can only be solved by cutting emissions has become gospel, leaving little room for alternative solutions like geoengineering. Environmental groups, governments, and even businesses have rallied around the idea of reducing carbon footprints and transitioning to renewable energy, despite the fact that this strategy is slow, expensive, and politically fraught. But is this orthodoxy blinding us to cheaper, faster alternatives? The space sunshade disrupts this narrative. It suggests that we don't need to spend trillions and upend entire economies to fight climate change. We could achieve the same or better results for a fraction of the cost. Yet the fixation on cutting emissions, no matter the cost, has crowded out serious discussion of alternatives. What's more, the industries and political movements built around renewable energy have a vested interest in keeping the focus on emissions reduction, even if it may not be the most efficient solution, a solution we can't ignore. The question we should be asking isn't whether a space sunshade is a radical idea, it's whether continuing to spend $50, $60 trillion on an energy transition that might not be fast enough is the real madness. While traditional approaches to fighting climate change involve huge financial costs, slow progress, and massive economic upheaval, a space sunshade offers immediate results for a fraction of the price. At an estimated $12, $18 trillion, with low ongoing maintenance costs, a sunshade could cool the planet far more quickly than any emissions reduction program. It's time to ask whether the climate orthodoxy is holding us back. Are we so fixated on cutting emissions that we're ignoring cheaper, faster, and possibly more effective solutions? Deploying a space sunshade could be the bold move we need to avoid climate disaster, and it could do so without bankrupting the planet in the process. As the climate crisis worsens, it's time to rethink our strategy. Maybe the space sunshade isn't the last resort. It's the smart solution we've been avoiding. If you found this argument intriguing, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking content on science, technology, and the future of our planet. Stay tuned for more debates on innovative ideas that could change the world.